All right, well, good evening, everyone. As Vivek just said, my name is Ted Ramey. I am a sports broadcaster. I am back in front of a microphone, so it's my relative comfort zone. But I wanted to start out talking tonight about the whole field of sports analytics and start off with Moneyball, because I think that's a way that a lot of people first became aware of kind of the sports analytics scene. I get a show of hands of people who saw the Moneyball with Brad Pitt. Yeah, everybody. And it's a very fascinating movie. Now there are some liberties taken. They kind of overlooked that the A's had the best three pitchers in the American League. They had a big three rotation. They had MVP at shortstop. They had just an incredible cadre of talent that had been put together over the years. And they kind of all boiled it down to this idea that they were going to plug in Scott Hatteberg at first base, and then they were going to win 20 games in a row, which works really well for Hollywood. But that's not really how it all went down. But there was one line in the movie that I always found very interesting, and it's kind of the iconic line that you hear people use when they reference the movie, and it was the line, "How can you not be romantic about baseball?" And you say, yeah, that's true. How can you not be romantic about baseball? But it was also, to me, very ironic because it's all based on a book which really takes away the athlete, their psychology, their individual performances, and turns it into their literal metrics, their units of measure. And to me, it's like, well, that's literally the most unromantic way of looking at an athlete, saying the person doesn't exist, just their numbers. And so when you started to think about that, you can see why people get lost in this whole idea of there's so much data out there. And I was joking earlier, I was like, I'd come up here and tell you all about BABIP and QZR and ERA and ERA plus and WAR and kind of go down the list of all these different metrics that people use when they're talking about baseball players in particular and just athletes, because the advanced metrics, they got popular in baseball, but now they go along to the realms of all sports. There isn't any area that is not going to be used for the sporting world because there is so much that we can measure now that we could never measure before. And that's essentially how it pertains to the athlete. The athlete is out there, they're looking at their performances, they're looking at what these numbers actually represent, they're looking at everybody and saying, what are they actually doing on the field as opposed to what we're actually looking at on the field? Because there is a disconnect between what we see. Not everybody who has great numbers is always as good as we might think they are. Not everybody who has bad numbers is as poor as we think there are. There's just different ways of looking at it now. We know a little bit more. When you look at fans in the entirety of where this kind of all plays in is that we are the ones who are feeding in billions of dollars into this industry, whether it's for the broadcast rights, whether it's for the digital streaming rights, whether it is for apparel, whether it is for just anything you can think of in the sporting world that you're giving money to. I know my phone's going to buzz like 20 times tonight with all the different scores that are coming in, with all the different things that are going on around the sports world. So it's interesting to see where it's all coming from. And that kind of goes, you've got the athletes, you've got the fans, and then you do have the money. And that is, I think it's exploding right now in the world of sports because there is so much data that was never known before that now we all look at and we can say, hey, I can use this in this field, I can use it in that field, I can use it in this, I can use it to improve performances here. And it's changing, from high school sports, youth sports, all the way up to the top. And it gets more and more complicated, but at the same time, you have to start asking yourself, how are they actually using that data? And one of the things that I always worry about is the idea, and I can walk, you can still hear me? This is on now? Okay. Well, how do you not look at all this data and get shaken up by it? Because everybody up here is working in a different field, and they are all putting out tons and tons of data. And so these different teams, these different entities are all looking at all this data, and you could easily get what we call the paralysis by analysis. Now, usually it's something that we use in terms of like a quarterback, they're dropping back to pass, and they can't see anything that's out in front of them. They're just overwhelmed with the information. I think some of that can go on in the athletic industry today with teams. They're having just tons and tons fed at them that teams 20 years ago weren't really privy to. If you talked about sabermetrics and baseball per se, that was the one thing that Moneyball did get accurate. People looked at you with a bit of a raised eyebrow and kind of said like, whoa, what are you doing? You're talking about baseball players. And then you go from there and you start saying, what is this all telling us? And that, all of these gentlemen up here are going to tell us what the data is telling us, because they're all coming at it from a different angle, and I'm sure they'll all have different answers of what that data is telling them, because there's a million ways to take it. You go from there, how is the market then using that data? How are they selling it to you? How are they using it for the athletes? How are they using it for the fans? How are they using it for the teams? How are they using it for development of any number of issues? And you see that we're talking about an incredible influx of information. And then also, there is that which we don't even know about yet. That's where this is all heading. And some of the things that I want to talk about tonight, injury prevention. I'm sure those of you that are baseball fans are well aware of the epidemic of Tommy John surgeries, which is stemming from the tear of the UCL ligament. That's where all the strain is put, the ulnar collateral ligament. When you throw a baseball, it's quite a lot of torque that's put on the body. Performance evaluation. Do we have any 49ers fans in the house? I know, it's not that fun right now. They'll get better. But Chip Kelly, when he was with the Eagles, before he was fired by the Eagles and then summarily hired and fired by the 49ers, he was looking at athletes' kind of biometric markers, and he was having them do urinalysis and having them do other things and keep track of biometrics inside iPads that people got into a little bit of a, well, where is this data going? Is it the Eagles? Is it the players? That's a whole nother issue, but that was something that was kind of new. But now actually teams, athletes all around are kind of looking at that and saying, you know what, maybe it wasn't so strange that he was looking at that data. And you start looking at that, saying, how can we use? What can we learn about these biometric markers? What can we learn about what the athlete's metabolic rates and how much kind of waste product their kidneys and muscles are putting out after strenuous workouts? Exercise science. If you need a better example of exercise science, go back, I would say, before about 1975. And if you walked up to somebody and they said, how are you going to make your team better? And the answer was, I'm going to have them get in a squat rack and put their body weight on their back and start squatting. They would all look at you like you were a crazy person. Now, in 2017, if you gave that answer to somebody, they would say, I agree. The empirical data shows that is the best way to create explosive force in an athlete. But a couple generations ago, they said squats made you slow, weightlifting made you muscle bound, and that it would take away from your athleticism. So that was something that, again, a couple generations ago, people looked at and said, you're crazy. Now we look at and say that is obvious application we can see how it's turning into in terms of performance on the field. Athletes, for lack of a better term, are bigger, faster, and stronger because of the application of that exercise science. Nutrition science, that's another element of it. People look at it and they say, okay, athletes' diets, it's tremendous. These guys, depending on what type of a person they are, it's not uncommon for them to know exactly the grams of protein, the grams of fat, how much carbohydrates, how much water they're drinking. There have been athletes, Jason Hayward in baseball, his teammates used to make fun of him because he would have his frozen chicken breasts mailed to him at the different places he was playing around the country because he didn't want to deal with eating food that was not specifically catered to his own kind of, his body type and what his body was getting. Ethical concerns, work rates of an athlete. I know that they can monitor in-game heart rate levels, blood pressure, things like that. Can that be used against an athlete? Data and gambling. The NFL is coming to Las Vegas. All this data that we know about players in the NFL, very, very practically applied to the world of gambling. Not everybody's that comfortable with that, although the NFL is getting more and more comfortable with it. Again, injuries, what is the data telling us about those injuries? And then the whole idea of because that's where I think this is all going, is that when you talk about where all these industries are coming from, this information and this science as it pertains to sports, that eventually comes to the home consumer. And that's where my level of concern is that you are going to be using your Fitbits, you're going to be using your health apps, you're going to be eventually using a smart toilet that's going to be telling you a urinalysis in real time. Our health insurance companies, are they going to be looking at that data? Is our data for sale? And I know it sounds a little bit far-fetched right now, but you may have noticed healthcare a bit of an issue in this country right now. This is what we're talking about, evaluations at any time. And then you also get into the amount of precedent that's being put on youth sports. The Soviet or the Chinese models, they would go and look at kids early in their lives and say, this one's going to be a track athlete because we can tell from their build, this one's going to be a weightlifter, this one's going to be a gymnast, this one's going to be... Now, you kind of have that idea. I'm sure at a young age, you'll be able to look at a kid's, again, biometric markers and say, hey, this is what they might be having the most aptitudes towards. So we pay attention to that. Again, the fans, Virtual reality is coming to sports. You'll be sitting on your couch, but you'll feel like you're courtside at the Warriors, which to me is if you've seen some of the prices for the NBA Finals, it might be a better investment of your money right now, unless you just got to be there. That's kind of where this is all headed. And then the unknown is the future right now. We don't know exactly where it's headed, but I'm excited for it, and I think it opens up a realm of opportunities that we're going to hear about tonight. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Stephen Smith. He is our presenting startup. He's going to tell us about himself and what he's doing. Stephen, I don't know if you'll need the remote, but thank you very much, and let's all listen.
Stephen Smith, the CEO and founder of Kitman Labs. We are a sports science and medicine technology platform, work across global elite and professional sport. My background prior to all of this was as a practitioner, so I've spent my entire career working in professional sport. I ran all aspects of sports science and sports medicine for an Irish rugby team known as Leinster Rugby. That's the weird accent that you're picking up. So in terms of, I suppose, our team and the composition of our team, we were very like what Ted was talking about in terms of the Oakland Athletics, in that we were a low budget team. We had to compete with teams that had 6, 7x the budget our team had. And for us, what that meant was for us to compete on the domestic stage, but also for us to compete on the European stage, we had to be very, very smart about how we trained our athletes, about how we kept our talent on the field, and about how we actually took to the field to perform every weekend. We were one of the most innovative sides in European sport. We were the first Northern Hemisphere team to use GPS technology back in 2007. And I think after the excitement of having all of this data from GPS and wellness and psychological data and biomechanical information and fitness and strength profiling information, after the excitement of having this wore off, we realized that we did not know what to do with it. We had no idea what any of the information meant. And I think teams today are still feeling that same pressure. All of this information is now here, and Ted mentioned it, it is paralysis by analysis. So for us, what we decided to do was take a step back and ask a question and decide what is the question that we are trying to solve? What is the performance question for us? And our head coach said he would take care of everything on the field if we gave him the best talent every single week. So my job was to use that data to prevent injuries. So what we decided to do at that point in time was to perform a longitudinal study, collect all of our electronic medical records, collect all of the other data, and then perform regression analysis on that to understand what the information meant. We became extremely successful through this method. We reduced our injury profile by just over 32% year on year for 2 years. We won our first European Cup ever in the history of our club. And throughout the period of time I was there, we became the most successful European rugby franchise in history, and still today hold that record. That led me to actually creating this company and moving and allowing our technology to touch global sport. And one of the questions we continue to ask is, just because we have more data and we're now capable of making more decisions, because we have more tools, we have HRV data and we have GPS data and we have biomechanical information, now we're making more decisions with this. But what we don't know is, are those decisions better? And we question that every single day. Just because we have more data, does that mean that we're making better decisions? And in many cases, what we're finding is that, in fact, the decisions are worse. And we have data to prove that. So what we do what we do to pull this all together is we put electronic medical records at the center of everything, and then we take every other athlete data point and we communicate it directly back to that, statistically relate that information back to allow these teams to understand, interpret this information, communicate it, make better decisions, keep their talent on the field, and keep them winning. This, for example, is an NFL team. This is data from the last season in the NFL. This particular team looked at the demands of the game. They added up the total number of training sessions they performed throughout the week, and they decided this is the cap for athletes in terms of the amount of high-speed running they should perform every week. If an athlete does more than 2,000 meters, they believed that athlete was going to be susceptible to fatigue and underperforming in the game, but also they were going to be at risk of injury. When we pulled this information and correlated with historical injury information, what we actually could see was the complete opposite. When they did anything above 1,500 meters of high-speed running in a 7-day period, they never broke. If they did anything less than that, they broke more and more. And what's very unusual but not unique in this scenario is, if this team looked like a normal, healthy team, we would see this graph become U-shaped. Because as the athletes do more and more, we also start to accumulate fatigue and break them down. But they never saw that profile happen here, because they never ever got to a point where they overloaded their athletes. So what we could do by relating these two data points together is help them to understand what the minimum amount they need to do is. And actually what they needed to do is, instead of holding people back and wrapping them up in cotton wool, they needed to push athletes forward and to make sure that they had the physical capabilities to actually deal with the demands of the game. So what that turns into in our product is the ability to take any data point that they're collecting from any format and relate it directly back to injury risk. In this particular example here, what we can see is these guys are looking at somebody's psychological score of muscle soreness. So when they walked in that morning, did they say that muscle soreness was a 1 all the way through to a 10? What they're looking at here is if anybody has a muscle soreness score of above 5, they want to be notified. They want to go speak to that athlete, potentially treat them, and hopefully intervene and reduce any issues that they have that may pertain to risk. What we can see is here is we're analyzing 75 athletes. We have nearly 18,000 data points and nearly 150 injuries in this sample. You can see that 95% of athletes report a score throughout the season of less than 5. 4.1% of athletes report a score of greater than 5. So what this is telling us is that they're getting alerted essentially about 4% of the time, which sounds fine. Not that much data to actually have to ream through, so we've made it easier. But what you can see here is that depending on the score, the height of these bars tells us about the perceived injury risk. So we can see if anybody reports a score of less than 5, injury risk is about 1%. If they report a score above that, it's nearly 3 times as high. So they're basically now getting notified when somebody's risk is 3 times as high. If you look at this a little bit closer, and it's hard to see on this slide, but what you can actually see is if somebody reports a score of 6, their injury rate is exactly the same as it is if it's less than 5. What we can also see here is that there's 1,056 samples here. This tells us that over the course of that season, 1,056 times they've been notified about a piece of data that is completely meaningless and possibly made a change to that athlete's schedule or program based on something that's completely meaningless. What our system allows them to do is to optimize this and to see when something's meaningless, throw it out, and make a better decision based off exactly that. So why does all this matter? People talk about sports science and sports medicine as this marginal gain. Oh, it's this extra 1% that's going to get us there. We decided that we didn't believe that, and we didn't buy into that, and we wanted to prove it. And not just through our opinions, and not just through what we're saying, we wanted to prove it through numbers. So what we showcased is that we performed some research over 5 years of data in the NBA. The average team each season spends $12.9 million on injured players' salaries alone. When you break that down into the types of injuries, what we can actually see is that 8.1 million of that is due to potentially avoidable injuries. Ruptures, strains, and sprains that occur through non-contact mechanisms. 8.1 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but who cares? Most of these teams are owned by people that are very wealthy and don't really care about the waste of money. What they do care about, though, is winning. So the question we asked was, how does this money relate back to wins? So what we did was we basically added up the total spend for each team in the NBA over the course of 5 years. We then went back and looked at the historical medical data. We prorated every athlete's salary and took away a day's worth of salary for every day that he was missing. So we calculated the total amount available to win. We then correlated that with the wins and losses and found the correlation was extremely strong. It was 0.76 in the NBA. It was actually 0.89 in the NFL. What that shows us is there's a direct correlation between the amount of talent that you have in terms of dollars and your ability to win games. What it shows us is that if you have $46.6 million worth of athlete on the court in the NBA, that guarantees you 40 wins in the Western Conference and 36 in the Eastern. But that gives you a 0% chance of getting into the playoffs, so it's not much good. If you have $52 million worth of athlete, that will guarantee you 49 wins and 43 wins and a 100% chance of getting to the playoffs. So what this shows us is that if you can reduce that 8.1 million of potentially avoidable injuries, that has the ability of taking you from a 0% chance of getting to the playoffs to 100% chance of getting to the playoffs. And when you work out the exact dollars needed based on that $8.1 million, the exact dollars needed for each win, that shows us that that 8.1 million is worth 9 wins. That's not a 1%er. That's 20% of the wins needed to get to the playoffs. That is a core pillar of performance, and that is how important injury prevention, sports science, and sports medicine is in elite sport. And we've replicated that research across all 5 of the big leagues in the US, and we can showcase exactly what that contribution is across each individual league. So we are the proven global leader in this space. We're the only people on the planet that link athlete data directly back with electronic medical records. We now, based on 2 years ago when I moved over here to the States, we worked across 2 leagues globally. Today we work across 26 different leagues globally. And we've showcased that we've helped teams to reduce days lost by about 42% on average every single year. But we're not finished there. It's really, really exciting to be able to do that in sport. But just as Ted mentioned, this is a bigger problem. This is getting democratized every single day. Devices like Fitbit are being released, and this information, the high quality and depth of information that's been collected on elite athletes and now starting to be collected across consumers and population health scenarios. Well, why can't we do exactly the same thing? Why can't we link that data back with electronic medical records, because we have them everywhere here? Why can't we do exactly the same process and help insurance companies to optimize what they're actually doing, what they're seeing, and how we can bring down the costs that we know are growing exponentially every year in the US? 1.7 billion people are affected by musculoskeletal injuries globally every single year. It's over 125 million people in the US, and it's growing by about 400,000 every year. That's costing $213 billion in the US alone, and it's growing by $3 billion based on those 400,000 extra patients every single year. This is an enormous problem, and we're incredibly excited about how we can actually help to solve that. Thank you very much.
I wanted to have everybody introduce themselves as well. Michael, let's start with you. Say hello to the people.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to all the folks who put this event together. That was a great presentation, Stephen. I'm the founder and CEO of Bridge Athletic. We're a San Francisco-based athletic technology company. Like Stephen, I was in professional sport when I founded the company. I was a professional water polo player, and I founded it out of necessity. I was training and playing in Spain in the professional league there. I was traveling frequently, and I found it incredibly challenging to track my training performance data and also communicate with my coaching staff, which was at the United States Olympic Training Center. Everything back then in 2009, 2010, 2011 was being done pen and paper, golf pencils, and my trainer, who was one of the top trainers in the world, and I decided to found Bridge Athletic to build a cloud-based technology platform. Fast forward a few years, we have about 200 customers who are organizations ranging from professional teams in all of the major sports leagues. I saw about 5 logos on Stephen's slide where we share customers. So we work together in the space where the data that we collect from the training plans and the performance information actually can flow into Kitman as one of the inputs of data for the types of regressions that they're doing there. Again, we're based in San Francisco. Many of us are Cal and Stanford graduates, so we have deep roots in this area, and it's excited to be here tonight.
Sure. Hi, my name is John Malloy. I'm the designated VC on the panel. Wannabe athlete, full-time investor now. So I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. My office is actually on the other, right behind V Labs, and this is the first time they've invited me here to speak. I think that it's really funny to me because I happen to be an investor in Kitman, full disclosure, and so it took me investing in an Irish guy, getting him to move over here and bring this technology to the United States to get invited to V Lab. What's up with that? But you know, in all seriousness, you know, I always look for problems to solve. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with some really exciting companies over time, but at that point in time when we invested, or I invested in those kinds of companies, people thought things were impossible. You know, so an example would be a company, a more recent company would be Waze. So I invested in Waze in 2008. The iPhone had just come out, and the App Store did not exist. And the notion that you could change cartography, which really was the big idea, seemed wacky, you know. But that was GPS, right? And you know, the bet now in hindsight looks so obvious. It was not obvious for a long time, and that, you know, that there's many stories like that, and that's what makes me excited. When I met Stephen, what made me excited about this space was I saw all this data being collected, but nothing that was actionable. And so my goal long term is really the second part of what Stephen said, which is I think that we can make a difference for humanity, that we shouldn't accept things as they are. We can, you know, the things that are on you, I come from the cell phone industry, those devices you carry on you is just a box of sensors. And we can know a lot about you. Yes, there's privacy issues, but we should be able to prevent injury. The notion that we can't do that That's a fallacy. 10 years from now, people are going to look back on that and think that that was so short-sighted. And I think we're just at the beginning. And I'm excited to be here on this panel because I actually think that sports, professional sports, is going to lead, is the leading edge of this for a lot of competitive reasons and dollar reasons, because people will invest in those athletes. But ultimately, we have to bring it back to the broader audience.
And on the end, we have Howard Wright. He wanted the end because he takes up space in his own words.
Yes. I got to put our two bald heads on the opposite panel. We get too close
Cut down
together,
the
too much
glare.
shine. So thanks for having us, Ted and everybody else. Howard Wright, Vice President, Business Development. Our team runs global business development for Intel Sports Group inside Intel Capital. Our unapologetic goal is to digitize and personalize sports. So what we're doing is working very closely with the leagues around the world, with the affluent and powerful and influential owners in those leagues, to do some digital storytelling. Think of us as having basically a double-barreled shotgun approach of technology that we're putting inside the stadiums. One is the replay technology that you might have seen at Super Bowl the last couple of years, at we're at the NBA Finals, MLB, All-Star Game. We've been doing things around the world, including in Barça and Real Madrid with El Clasico. That is the volumetric video capture of taking and deconstructing every voxel in the stadium, reconstructing it on Intel's servers, of course, because that's where we make sure that we do it on our own product, and then delivering that up through either the live linear feed and including through social media and interactive. That part, the 3D replay, we're in 15, 16 stadiums and plan to be in a couple dozen more here very quickly, including with a league-wide deployment that we have signed and announced with the NFL. In addition to that, we purchased a company called Voke, which is right here in Silicon Valley also. It is now rebranded Intel True VR. Of course, we bought it. We get to name it what we want. And the idea is that is the best in the breed of fixed point, panoramic, stereoscopic VR. So the replay cameras go in at the mezzanine at the Levi Stadium, right at the skybox, 36, 38, 5K cameras. The Intel True VR pods are the size of really big, fat Frisbees, and they go either on the court for basketball, where you have a penalty kick for soccer. For basketball, we also put them in the basket stanchion that we did at the Final Four. You take volumetric video content capture and fixed point VR, whether it be in a head-mounted display or on a screen. We believe, and we're showing that you can create immersive content that nobody else in the world can view. And we're really proud to partner with and be kind of the digital general contractors to the phenomenal leagues around the world. What does Intel know about sports? Very little, but we know quite a bit about throwing a lot of ones and zeros around, throwing data around a small place, this room, an airport, we're in at Golden State or at Levi Stadium. The last couple Super Bowls at Levi, I think there were 7 terabytes of data that came flying in and out of there. Last Super Bowl that we did in Houston, I think it was 11 or 12 terabytes of data. So you see quite kind of casually a happy accident for us at Intel is we're creating and fueling even more data coming out of what we like to call, these are the oil fields. If data is the new oil, the oil fields are where we go every Saturday night, Sunday, and spend 3 and 4 hours. And it's very rewarding and exciting for all of us. Going way back 30 years ago and 30 pounds ago, I was a pretty decent athlete and got lucky enough to play in the NBA a 3 seasons. And then it always been in high tech. So now coming back at this epicenter of sports and technology and media and panels like this, we're excited to find, and we are sure it's the power of the partnership. Intel is not going to do this alone. We're going to help plan to partner with folks on this stage, folks hopefully in this auditorium, that this is what is going to be the new normal in terms of digital storytelling as we enjoy it in the world. Thanks.
And we also have sitting with us John Brinkus of ESPN, as well as New York Times, USA Today, one of the foremost experts in the world. And John, if I could invite you up for just a second to just touch on the subject. We've got an expert we have to consult.
Thanks so much. For those of you who don't know, my name is John Brinkus. I created a show called Sports Science that started on the Fox Sports Network. It's been on for 10 years. It's now transitioned over to ESPN. We've won 6 Emmys. We've done over 1,500 segments. We've worked with, just hundreds and hundreds of the world's greatest athletes. Been extraordinarily blessed to be part of the journey of sports science. When we actually sold the show in 2009, you couldn't buy anything off the shelf. And we were fashioning sensors together, using technology from TechScan and fusing it together with the only federally certified crash test dummy to try to figure out how much force, someone was creating. It's been a completely insane ride, and I've been very blessed to have a front row seat to not only play with every toy that's out there, but to really dig in to figure out what matters. And I love what you guys have all said, because we are in the midst of a complete data explosion. And I've been ridiculously fortunate to be able to really pick apart the data and say what does matter. One thing that I caution everybody against, whether it's in the field of sports science or any other data set, is to not fall in love with the biggest, strongest, fastest, the top of the curve. Don't fall in love with that, because if you actually look at the curve of anything, the very, very, very top very rarely is the best, no matter what it is. There are all kinds of excellent examples, as not including this last draft, but if you were to take the top 10 fastest 40-yard dash times measured by the NFL, of those 10 fastest times on the offensive side of the ball, 2 of the top 10 gained 1,000 yards in a season. The other 8 didn't gain 1,000 yards in their careers. So that means if you're one of those guys walking around saying, I got one of the fastest time, 80% likelihood you don't pan out. That's the top of the curve. You want to be big enough, strong enough, fast enough, but you don't want to be the top of any one thing. When people are looking at youth sports, they're really enamored with getting data on youth sports and trying to extrapolate out what does this mean for the future. And my kids, I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and everyone comes up to me and they're like, yeah, check out my kid. I'm like, you are so jumping the gun on this. Yes, your kid is great. He's 8. It's awesome. The number one thing with kids is to make sure that they're great overall athletes. And really the data is meaningless up until they've picked a sport in their late teens. It's literally meaningless, because there are so many people who make it in every sport that come to it at age 16, 17, 18, sometimes not until college. Many people in the NFL that make it who only played a season or 2 in college or didn't play in college at all. That's the new rage, especially at the position of tight end. Basketball players are transitioning over. So there are tons in the youth market. It's way more important that kids are overall athletes, that they're playing multiple sports, than focusing and going all in from the age of 5 on one thing. And I can tell you, just based on my interactions with athletes, it actually is not the usual case that someone's like, wow, I was 5 and I was great at it and that was that. It's usually, well, they played every sport year round, and then when they were in their late teens, they picked one and focused on it and ran with it. That's the usual story. So I'm really blessed to have been a part of this, and you guys have an incredible panel here. And if you all ever need to get in touch with me, ever have a question or everything, you can follow me on Twitter. You can send me direct messages at johnbrinkus_. It's just been, it's an amazing ride. It's fascinating, and I think you're really blessed to have this team of experts up here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here. I guess where we go from here is the question I wanted to start off, and Stephen, I'll go with you here, and anybody else who wants to weigh in on this. And John was just talking about youth sports. So right now, if you're a kid growing up, you've got an innings limit, you've got a pitches limit, they're aware of the high stress situations. They know if you're throwing a curve, a fastball, a changeup. They know whether or not you're cracking the whip appropriately when you're making those pitches. And even though we know all of that, there are more and more UCL injuries than we've ever seen. And even though we think we've seen the peak, actually some of the more recent data has shown that it's actually increasing still. So what's going on there? Why aren't we using that data appropriately? Or is it just now that we are studying it more, so we've started off at the floor and now we're just learning more and more?
I think it's a great question. Even if you look at the professional level, there's pitch counts in the professional leagues as well. They don't seem to be solving the problem. They're certainly not solving it at youth sports level either. I think it's really interesting to think about it. If you look at the number of injuries that were occurring before they brought the pitch count in and the number of injuries that are occurring since they brought it in, it actually looks like they possibly have stimulated the problem to get worse. And I think I would question how did they reach the point where they said that 80 pitches was the most you could throw. They don't count how many times somebody gets up, before they get out on the field and actually throw. They don't count how many you do throughout the day. I think there's a very limited understanding. And I think for me, especially the background I'm coming from, is that, I think to implement a strategy like that and for it to be successful, you need to ask a really strong question. Their question should have been, and I think still should be, does pitch count influence injury rate? And they should collect enough information about the number of pitches that people throw. They should collect enough information about the number of injuries occur, and then they should understand, is that a meaningful data point or not? And if it is, how do we actually use it? And is it the same for everybody? Is it different for different people? Some of the work that we've been doing around analytics is understanding different phenotypes of human being that exist. And we found 8 different phenotypes at this point in time of humans that respond to stresses and demands in different ways. And that's incredibly interesting, because now that means that we can have completely different analytical models to fit each of those people to ensure that they get treated different. Because we all know from looking at popular sports today, you'll see athletes that you think are incredibly robust. Like ESPN had a really great article last week on LeBron James where he said, when I do more workload, I feel better. We see that in athletes that do more workload that feel better. But you see other athletes that are really, really fragile. And if you do anything outside of what's normal for them, they start to break down, and they're known as fragile. Well, they're not. They just have a completely different makeup, so they need to be managed in a different way. And I think starting off with asking strong questions and trying to understand them better will allow us to make better decisions about how we actually manage these epidemics and how they actually get worse and how they impact our games.
Howard, how can Intel help with a problem like this?
Yeah, so this is right in our sweet spot, which is it's objectivity versus subjectivity. When we grew up playing sports, whatever the coach told you to do, you did because you trained ideally like somebody was training off in a distant land to be that player. But men lie, women lie, numbers do not lie. The more information we can gather from connected uniforms, from the optical tracking, from all the information that comes off of, you put a sensor in a shoe, in a sock, in a knee sleeve, in a dry fit vest, in the uniform itself. All of that is raw data. Now, we don't need all of the raw data to be just shot out on Facebook. What you need is to take that digital haystack, predictive analytics, some AI, some cognitive learning, and then you can pull out the golden needles that help a trainer or help a coach or help a owner or general manager pick the soon-to-be professionals that have something different, that are uniquely qualified, not just their 40 time, not just their number of 225 bench press. Those arbitrary things, I think, are going to be viewed as archaic very quickly, and we're going to cross over this other divide where the numbers coming off process it in ways that the human brain cannot quickly enough, but the machine learning can, and then we deliver information back to us, injury prevention, and we're all looking for, is it 1%? Is it 2%? If you could get 3% better in whatever field of professionalism that we have, well, that means difference of tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars at the highest level. It's tens of millions of dollars. Not all of us, or none of us, are going to be born Shaq or Bo Jackson or Kobe Bryant or LeBron. Those are anomalies. We're talking about the rest of us humans. Those are immortals in many ways. But in the quest to get better, in the 80s it was done with PEDs and HGH, and everybody was trying to build a Ivan Drago. Now it can be done with the absolute facts. The facts in this case will never be wrong.
Michael, how does your digitization of that human performance play into this?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say I think that I love machine learning, I love big data, like everyone else in this room, but I think this problem of injury is in culture and markets. And I blame it on the college coaches. When you think about youth sport, it all drives up to the top. The majority of kids putting their parents in sports programs are to get them a scholarship into college, and for some to get to the next level, which is professional sports. If we look at, I think about my dad growing up and the way he played sports. He played football in the fall, he played baseball, and then track and field, 3 different sports. Now if you look at a kid in high school who's trying to go and play in college, they're generally focusing on one sport even before high school, and they're pulled in a lot of different directions. It's not just their high school program. In many sports, like baseball specifically, they have a showcase team, they have their club team, they have a high school team. They might be playing 6, 7, 8 games in 1 week, where 10, 15, 20 years ago, that just wasn't the case. So I think it's a question of specialization, and I think that the college coaches moving their recruiting cycles earlier and earlier and earlier, where now freshmen and sophomore are signing letter of intent, which used to be reserved for 18-year-old mature athletes. It's forcing kids to do a lot more at a younger age. So I think it's a markets question. In terms of the digitization question with regards to Bridge and what we're thinking about, when we think about data, it's less in the form of, and as we apply it to youth sports specifically, it's less in the form of taking data out of the workouts and using that to basically decide things, which is what Steven and the elite space are doing. In the youth sports space for us, what we're using data for is to create the perfect workout for the athlete. So based on their sport, their position, their training calendar, their strengths and weaknesses, we can take an FMS screen, which is a functional movement screen. That's a way you can see which parts of your body are stiffer or tighter or less mobile than others. And we can take that information and algorithmically, not using a big data algorithm, but a simple algorithm, prescribe corrective movements. And this is leaps and bounds ahead of what's available for a lot of kids right now who are just going into the weight room and doing a workout that is written on the wall or they're finding on the internet, which, the internet is great, but it provides a lot of misinformation in addition to the right information. And so we're using data a lot in youth sports. I think right now we're training over 10,000 athletes, and we're using that data to provide them with workouts that will actually provide them with the proper outcomes for where they are in their career.
John, is this where the mobile platform is going to come in? Is this going to help the coaches and the athletes put that information down most accurately as it pertains to getting the immediacy of it, or is it just a matter of them having that availability?
Well, it already is. So, the mobile's what enables all of this already. So all the sensors that are being used are, we've driven them to commodity with mobile technology. That's what makes this all happen. But the communication piece is the most important, is making this as actionable as possible in as timely a manner as possible. And also allowing there to be power given to the people who actually can make a difference in the viability of an athlete or the improvement of an athlete, right? So I think, it used to be, as a washed-up athlete, old in the 70s, 80s, Neanderthal coaches would just tell you to go harder, and now, with data, you can actually start to begin to see other voices be heard, and you can also start to empower the back office staff so they can actually speak up. And Steven's presentation is germane because you have to turn it into what the coach cares about, which is, hey, we got to win, right? You got to turn into wins, you got to turn into dollars, because that's really what sports is about. And you need all those pieces, but underneath it all, absolutely, it's the core communication, the ability to take action when it's appropriate.
So tell us then why, with your VC background, what was it there that led you to Kitman?
I think that there's a huge waste at the moment, similar to Waze. That's why I picked that one. Waze was basically just changing the way we did maps on an exhaust signal of GPS. It was really dumb. I mean, it was just being thrown away. There was nothing really. No one thought that you could create an accurate map from it. It was just piling up. That was the basic idea. In this case, there's such a proliferation of different kinds of measurement. The complexities of the human body, there's so many different signals to consider. There has to be a platform that takes advantage of that and starts to derive clear decision-making advantage, right? That's really to me, that's the big idea, is really just starting to get the notion across that you can actually improve your performance. And that sounds so simple, but right now we're just at the very beginning of being able to prove it. But as I said earlier, I think that this is just the beginning. I think someday heart attacks, we should eliminate a large percentage of heart attacks based upon a cell phone in your pocket. There are clear tells. Predicting a UCL injury, I think, is even harder than predicting a heart attack in terms of the tells that everybody would show. The dynamic range of these incredible athletes is so different. But being able to build a system or systems that starts to enable that kind of decision making really sets the groundwork for these broader benefits.
So I'll parlay what you were saying there. He alluded to making it how it pertains to the coaches, how they're going to use that to win. So Michael, what is the data that the teams want? What are they after when they're looking at the data? How is that best parlayed to the team?
Yeah, that's a great question, and Stephen, feel free to jump in as well. But generally right now what we see, and I'll start with elite sport because that's the most interesting, you have, I would say the main question is readiness, and athlete readiness. And that basically means how recovered and how ready to train is an athlete right now. The different sources of data that they're reading to gauge this readiness are GPS on the field. So we heard a little bit about that earlier, but there's team-based GPS systems where each athlete is wearing, it's called a bra, and they have a chip in it, and it tracks how far they run. It tracks their accelerations, their movement in different directions. So that's one data source. Another is heart rate. So most teams are now using a device, and some of the GPS also pulls heart rate. And from that, you can get HRV, which is heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is an internal load marker, which is basically designed to show how ready your body is to train from the inside. So you can look at the external load, how far someone ran in a day. You can look at how their heart and their body are responding to it. And then you can look at subjective questionnaires and surveys. And that was some of the data that Stephen was speaking to earlier, muscular soreness, muscular fatigue. And so basically what coaches are trying to do is take all these inputs from sensors, from questionnaires, from the actual load that the athletes are training. And I didn't speak to bridge, which is in the weight room or performance training. What's that load and what exertion are they performing there? Look at it all, not just today, but over time, longitudinally, as Stephen said, and see how ready is an athlete today to train, how much load can I, as the coach, put on this athlete safely? And so I think that's kind of the holy grail right now, as I see it, is.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that this question of readiness is something that today is, we feel like 99% of the time is being guided completely subjectively. So whether it's what does the HRV information mean? So we have HRV devices telling us that somebody's not ready to train today. Well, oftentimes when we were using that, we would find that the same athletes were flagging up all the time, and the system was telling us, don't train that person today. Well, that person's job is to train and to play. And if 5 times out of 10, the system is telling us we shouldn't train them, then we can't get much productivity from it. And what was happening was coaches were saying, oh, well, this guy is like, it's crap, we can't get any use out of him, we got to throw him out, we got to recruit somebody else. And that's our misinterpretation of the data, because how has this device, this heart rate device, how has this information, how does this understand his genetic makeup and how different he is? Well, it doesn't. It's giving us a generic piece of information about him, and it's not allowing us to really understand him. I think what we're trying to do is take that objectivity completely off the table And to have that information there, okay, great, we have our practitioner experience. We understand what the information means at a very, at a basic level. But the system can tell us, okay, well, how often has his heart rate variability looked like X and he broke down, or how often has it not? And then we can actually say, okay, we know this guy's at 10% risk, he's at 5% risk, he's at 50% risk. And now it's not just the fact that, oh, this guy's not ready to train. Now we know the exact amount that he's not ready to train, or the exact amount of risk we can take. And it's about, you talked about this takes the art out of sport, or it takes that beautiful part out of sport. I don't think it does. I actually think this educates our decisions, and this helps us to understand people even better. I actually think the complete opposite. I think this makes the game more beautiful, because now we can really individualize our decisions because we understand human beings so well that we can micromanage them, not just based on the data, but based on how unique they are and what the data is telling us about that.
So if myself as a consumer, I want what we're describing up here, when is that going to be available? Because people, whether they're at a regular gym, at a CrossFit gym, if they're doing their cycling on the side, if they're into the 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathoner, or ultra distance running, everything we're talking about up here, people want. So when can I buy it?
I mean, it's coming. I think it's here already. It's here already in bits and pieces, and it's all starting to come together, but it's fast. I mean, I can't believe I'm nearly here 3 years now. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like, we've been here about 12 months. But, I think even if I look back to where things were before I actually came across here, like the industry is leaps and bounds different. And the idea that we could have our electronic medical records on our phones back then, like we knew leagues in Europe and in Australasia didn't even have electronic medical records. Now, like everybody here probably has electronic medical records on their phone, or if you don't, you actually have the availability to have them. That's amazing. So now with the emergence of smartphones to track every piece of data about what we actually do, and we have our electronic medical records, well, the capability to do what we do in elite sports, it's actually there. It's already there.
Yeah, Steve and I were at the NBA Combine talking about this last week or a couple weeks ago, and one of the things we were saying, it's interesting, you're an investor in Waze, there was no mapping platform when we started our companies. Effectively, we had to start from scratch. So imagine trying to build Waze and have this concept of this stream of data that could let you know where the traffic is, to simplify it. There was no map platform at that point digitally. I mean, our world was pen and paper, golf pencils, and it still is for, I would say, the majority of pro sports, and they're using these old archaic platforms that aren't capturing structured data. So a big part of our challenge over the last 3-5 years has been to build the platform first. Now we're collecting all this data, and now that we have the data, we can start to build these machine learning algorithms, build these better decision-making processes on top of this platform that really didn't exist. And it's amazing because 3-5 years ago, it was 2012. It wasn't 1998. So this is a late adopting industry, and the healthcare industry is even more of a laggard industry. It's amazing if you go look at what a physical therapist or your doctor is using for electronic medical records, because that looks like 1999 or 2002. And that industry is about to change rapidly. I think that we're pushing away from fee-for-service towards value-based care, and when that actually starts to happen, healthcare IT is going to take off, and ways for predicting heart attacks, ways for predicting shoulder surgery, for readmittance of shoulder surgery, that is going to actually start to happen. And it's not just a cool idea that won't work. And you guys should start funding these companies because
I am. But I would say probably the correlation that you can see adoption is probably John's advertising rate. So when you think of when your show started, you were just a little bit piece, and you've become more and more important to sort of the broader brand, right? You've become mainstream. Just how long ago did you start that show? Right. So thank you.
Yeah.
And it's just started.
I think the interesting thing there is that it's an educational piece as well. I mean, what Michael's talking about, that people are still using like golf pens and paper, it's still happening. That means that even though we're building this architecture and this is now available, we also still have to go in and educate the 50-year-old strength coach who has been doing what he's been doing for 35 years and doesn't want to do anything different and doesn't understand it, and possibly is afraid of change, or is afraid of being exposed, and is afraid of somebody finding out that he doesn't understand what this means and he's afraid to grow and he might lose his job. And that's a real big problem. It's a huge problem, in that we have to go in and also educate these people and actually teach them that, hey, this isn't going to help you to lose your job, but not jumping on board might. Like, this is actually going to help you to be better at your job and to do your, to use the skills that you've honed over 35 years to now be immense at what you're doing and to do it more efficiently and faster. And that's, that's part of our challenge as well. So not only do we have to build the map, then we have to build out the technology, then we have to educate the people, and we have to train them, and then we have to support them. It's happening. It's happening.
I want to get into some of the questions now that are coming in from the audience, and I think we got some good ones here. The first one is, how will consumer gene firms such as Fitness Genes affect youth sports? Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll try.
Okay.
To close on the other part, it's injury prevention, which Stephen and the rest of the panel has hit on, is going to be paramount to all of our success, our collective success. If you can, cure that, the correlation is, has a direct effect on value of your franchise, the value of your brand, yourself, et cetera. Second part is this sustainable high performance. When we were younger, we used to think, because we heard Jordan got into the zone. Everybody was trying to mythically find this zone that didn't really exist, but if you trained if you got your sleep, if your circadian rhythms if everything were aligned, you could sometimes stumble into the zone. Well, we have a world that is on schedules, and the game is at 7:35 p.m. every Thursday, Saturday, whatever your game is, and you basically have to prepare the athlete to be in this sustainable high performance rate. Now, if you back into that with the training that you talked about, with the deep objective analysis of the data that is coming off of the person, then you have a higher probability to reach your athletic maximum psychological peak in that window, as opposed to when we were kids and we were coming up and playing. Just try your best, get some sleep, don't hang out too late. All these arbitrary kind of unsubstantiated myths. Now we can narrow that corridor and show players how to train not just train like Cam or train like LeBron, but train like they should train for their body type. Mm-hmm. That is going to be, I think, the part that we kind of snap to grid on. That is, not everybody should train like LeBron. None of us are built like LeBron. Not all of us should train like Steph Curry, although some of us are, or the kids coming up are, smaller than the average, monster that plays in the NBA. So that delineation of getting yourself into the sustainable high performance mode versus waiting and hoping that during the game you somehow fall into the zone.
Yeah. All right, and John, if you want to hop up here as well and get on any of this, we'd love to have you. I can stand over here to the podium and let you have a seat. I warmed it for you. Here's one that I think I'm excited for this one because I really, really wonder where this is going. The question is, how soon do we think VR will become an everyday technology used in sport? And I'll take this in two directions. One is, I know that Stanford has done this, and I know that the 49ers have fooled around with the idea, and this is for football practice, them putting on the VR headsets that have the 360 motion capture technology. And so the quarterback, when not in a game situation, can see the field and kind of learn how to read a defense. And I think the other direction is, like I mentioned earlier, is like, you're going to see seats for the NBA Finals courtside going for tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, and that's not hyperbole. That's actually probably, I'm underestimating, I think. When am I going to be able to put on a VR headset and feel like I'm courtside in the viewing aspect of it when I'm actually just sitting on my couch and beers aren't $15 and there's a bathroom without a line?
Yeah. So you can do that right now. And so here's my infomercial for Intel True VR. You guys walked in the door, so you're going to get the infomercial, which is one of the things that we did with Final Four this year is worked very closely with Turner, very closely with CBS to create a digital ticket. You can put your head-mounted display on, and for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or the entire game, watch an immersive game either from the nosebleeds, from half court, from the Jack Nicholson seats right there. And eventually we're going to be able to take you onto the field of play virtually while the game is happening. When you are able to manipulate every voxel in free space, you can put yourself or put the subject in the middle of that. Then you can see what it's like to be a goalie and get a penalty kick from Messi or Ronaldo. You can see what it's like to try to defend LeBron backpedaling on the break. You can see what it's like to face a curveball or a fastball from Chapman at 105 miles an hour. You guys do that on TV all the time. I would love to experience that without the risk of getting hit in the head and concussed to do that. So this, again, digital storytelling and the virtual tickets, as well as creating the digital living room. So one of the things that both Commissioner Goodell and Commissioner Silver understand is that they have captured all the physical lands that they're ever going to capture. They built all the arenas pretty much everywhere, and they go traipsing around internationally for games. But they're not going to build 15 more, 20 more arenas for NFL teams or NBA teams. Well, in the Madison Square Garden, where 20,000 people are max that you can get in there anytime. So you kind of have a very finite amount of customers. Now, what if you have the VR stream that can be streamed to that device, to be that device, to this device eventually? Then you have basically 7 billion potential customers. Anybody has a screen connectivity and a credit card, and they're going to be able to play something 99 for that experience. This is where we think of digital storytelling and reaching out to the corners of the known universe with this technology that seemed kind of nascent years ago, but there's an inevitability about it. It will be part of our viewing apparatus going forward.
John, did you want to jump into this? I realize you're not mic'd up, so you should probably, yeah. It just felt weird to have you over there.
I think we are like in the very beginning of this VR experience. And the best book to read on this is Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. He picked, I believe it's 2045, as the year where man and machine are indiscernible from each other. So, and what's really interesting about that is I say that to people, and I'm like, that's right around the corner. I mean, I'm alive then, and we've probably invented something that keeps me alive for a really long time. But if you say, wow, 2045 is not the year, there will be a year. So in between today and that year, this experience, I mean, who knows if we're not going to, houses are probably going to be built with holographic rooms where it's like you're right in the middle of the action and it feels like you're there and there's no longer a headset. It's all holograms. Who knows where it ends up going, but it definitely is going to be a huge part of things moving forward.
And an interesting question here that I think pertains to you, John, and that is this one, is that do you see opportunities to diversify this technology to other fields? Is the tech transferable to other applications?
Beyond sports?
Yes.
Of course. Absolutely. That's why I'm here. Sports is really interesting, but it's really just the proof case, right? The benefits I see from sports are, first off, there's an unnatural interest in sports. I share it with everybody else. So society, there's a lot of money spent on sport. But if you look at sort of what's being leveraged, it's really the underlying mobile platform. And the mobile platform is ubiquitous. And the one difference between today and the future is passiveness. So today, you have these incredible professionals who've built these systems. Everybody's focused on LeBron or whoever, get them out. But really, to get it to go closer to mass market, and there's many steps before, we need to go to passive systems where you don't have to do work. Regular people are not going to be, having Steven tell them what they should eat or how much sleep they should get or those kinds of things. We should just be measuring that. We can already do that, but it's a question of when society will accept it. And it's happening already. I mean, within 5 years, that will be happening.
Here's a good one. Are there security issues with this data? If so, how do we address it? And they particularly reference the data hack incident between the Astros and the Cardinals.
Or Michigan, a couple other places. Yeah. So hackers are going to try to cyber attack anything that is of value. This is going to be incredibly valuable, whether it's professional or college. We are in the data curation business. We don't want to own the data. We want to help companies that actually own it, anonymize it, curate it and get it into the hands of the folks that have the permission to view it, and make sure that it does not get out into the open market, because that is extremely valuable. There could be other medical information in there about a player that only that player, only that coach, only that GM should know. We think of providing the platform to anonymize and curate it, but not to own it at all.
I think we believe there's a massive naivety in sport today. Now, when you look at all of the data that's being collected, and we see, I suppose we think, well, what part of this data is medical? You just referenced the medical data. Well, if we can showcase that the information that's collected through your volumetric cameras can be related back to tell us a story about injury incidents, that all of a sudden that's medical data. And today, one of the biggest issues we see that's facing sport is all of these different vendors are here. All of this data is being collected. We have GPS devices and heart rate devices and HRV, and all of these different things are already collecting data. They're not collecting them with the same level of security. They're not HIPAA compliant. They're not storing these data, in aggregated and anonymized fashions. And we think that is a massive error. We think all of that data right now is being collected and it's being transported any way people want, through Excel and email, and that's really, really dangerous. And one of the things that we do that's very different, because we link data back with electronic medical records, we actually treat every piece of data that comes into our system in anonymized and aggregated fashions, because we believe, given that it tells a story about that, it's actually medical data. Yeah. One of the biggest challenges we see is that people aren't aware of that today, and I think the PAs are going to become very aware of that very, very fast.
Michael, this one might play to your strengths. Is measurement of human biomechanics lacking, and can 3D replay be used for science as well as entertainment?
It's an interesting question. I think, in youth sports, I think the answer is no. It's not lacking. I think in youth sports, the fundamentals are the most important thing. And I always use a metaphor of filling up a bucket. And the first thing you put in the bucket are the rocks. And the rocks get you 75% full. And that's going to be fairly similar from athlete to athlete in a 13 to 15-year-old range. As you get up into college and then professional, now you have sand and you're trying to fill the bucket even more, and so you'll put an argon gas which will go seep into the tiny little cracks and get you that 10 basis point improvement. Sure, at that level I think the biometrics are important and will get you there, but somewhere in between they become relevant, and I think it's less relevant for younger athletes and more relevant for older athletes if you're doing all the fundamentals right from a training philosophy standpoint.
So John, do you want to?
I think on that point, what's interesting, what I keep harping about youth sports especially, is I feel like a lot of the breakthroughs in sports happen at the youth level because they're thinking outside of the box and they're doing things differently. If you even look at something like the radical change in the high jump with the Fosbury flop, like nobody would have taught you to do that unless somebody came along and said, God, the way you guys are doing that's wrong. And when you say, what's the correct way to throw a ball? What's the correct way to swing a bat? You go back and you look at Ted Williams versus Eddie Murray versus Pete Rose. Just take they're completely different. So in my mind, there's no way to reach 100% efficiency. There are a lot of ways to get to 95%, and there are different roads that people can take. And I think that we don't want to become enamored where we fall in love with just teaching one way. We want those outside of the box thinking, and I think that's going to happen really at the youth level.
Stephen, you, with the data you were bringing up and the work rates as they pertain to injury, we get this question, is too much info dangerous? Is a team liable if they play an athlete too much and he or she gets injured, or worse, ends up with a brain injury?
I'll take the fifth. No, I think, listen, I don't think too much information is dangerous. Too much information is dangerous if we have too much information and we're not leveraging it correctly and we're just making decisions haphazardly, which is happening across the industry today. I think, getting a very clear understanding of what the information means is only going to empower decisions. And then, listen, none of this from a modeling perspective or an analytics perspective is perfect. And we'll never get it perfect. But if these decisions, limit us from having one of those injuries where somebody gets, some type of brain injury, then we've already won. Okay, there's always going to be horrific injuries and things like that that we can never prevent, but all we're looking to do is to control that and minimize it and help to keep our best talent out there. And I think data can only help, and people that think that data can't help and we should ignore it or we shouldn't have it because it's dangerous, because it leads to things like that, that's not the way industries move forward.
Yeah, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, you mentioned something about kind of sports and entertainment. We see the line of demarcation is very thin on that. It's basically the same thing. And to that end, and trying not to be your grandfather's Intel, we're trying to do cooler stuff at the adjacencies. We're building a lab in Los Angeles in Redondo Beach next to some of the most famous directors in the free world, 25,000 square foot space. And we have a volumetric dome of, we're going to start with 84, maybe we'll go to 120 cameras. We have Voke, our Intel TrueVR pods. We'll have 5G. We'll have a little bit of Dexter's laboratory of all of our Intel cool stuff that we nerds like to put in there. And then we want to welcome Brinkus and other companies to come in and film something, sports science in there, test out some of these theories. A director that I will not name because it's not been signed has a big sequel coming up, and he wants to shoot the fight sequence in volumetric. Now, what do we charge him for that? We haven't figured that out, but that type of thing is where the lines are going to continue to be blurred between sports and entertainment because they're basically the same thing. And we want to be at the forefront and the vanguard of that revolution. We want to accelerate that into that curve with the partners, on this panel and then in the room.
2/3 of the Triple Crown are done.
Yeah.
There is the crowds, the gambling, we all see it. Is any of this data information, is this world being used by the equestrian world? I mean, I would imagine that those trainers, that they take information and those horses represent $1 million investments. So are they using this type of data as well?
They are, and they're less vocal about it because that is their family jewels. That is, the most important ingredient in legacy wealth creation for decades and decades. And if you find the best fishing hole, you're only going to tell maybe somebody directly in your family. You're not going to let the rest of the world know the information because that athlete, the horse, is not going to object to anything being strapped on, to be put on, or maybe even eventually injected into. But us two-legged mammals have a different point of view of what we're willing to be encumbered with on or in our person.
Interesting. I'm going to move over here because I'm going to be the fan for a second and be the audience question. Okay. And I'll ask everybody here, we like Las Vegas? Are you a fan? I am.
No.
And I find it fascinating. How is all this data going to be exploited by the NFL and the Las Vegas Raiders and just that cacophony of a scene that I think we're all predicting? Who wants to start? I think that's dread.
I think fantasy football is that.
Yeah.
That is what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, all the metrics and the ratings and the Madden ratings and all of this, explosion in data. I think it's already happening. It's not when is it going to happen? It's just going to continue to progress.
Yeah, so it's already happened in most European soccer leagues, and they're in tight partnership with either the team or the GMs or the leagues themselves. There's an inevitability that this is going to happen. The commissioners in the leagues here in North America understand that it's going to happen. They're trying to control the blast radius. And this goes back to the kind of the cybersecurity of if you knew that LeBron James got 4 hours sleep last night versus a requisite 8 or a 7 or whatever, all this information must be protected like it's Fort Knox, because somebody will try to arbitrage that, somebody will try to manipulate that, somebody will go to Las Vegas and bet the under or the over based on these little tiny imperceptible nuggets of information. We have to be good stewards of that, once we help create it for the ecosystem.
We already have that. That's called the stock market.
Yeah.
And I think there will
That's what
then
shorts
be
do every day.
there will then be a WikiLeaks for data of
Exactly.
people getting out, and then there's going to be fake data thrown in, and
Yeah.
people will say LeBron got 2 hours of sleep,
Yeah.
and everybody puts money on it.
Well, but John, they're talking about this now with the NFL, and they're now trying to figure out the mobile apps that are going to be allowed inside the new stadium there in Vegas to allow in-stadium gambling, people taking bets on the game. How does the NFL decide who they're going to do that with? Because I would imagine that the obvious answer of FanDuel or DraftKings, people would say, well, they've already got a little bit of a history with the NFL. The NFL, are they going to create their own?
So I'm the venture nerd on this panel, so I'm not beholden to any sports people. The NFL is going to do what they always do. They're going to take the most amount of money they possibly can get. That's the answer. It is what it is.
But that being known, taking the most money, they have to figure out how that's going to make the most money for them in terms of, because that investment's going to be, or that partnership is going to be only one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, it's going to be making fans okay with what they're doing, because there's a lot of people who love the NFL who might not be cool with gambling, and then there's people who are absolutely cool with both.
I mean, I can connect some dots here potentially. So there's another company in our space called Whoop, and they make this wristband that basically it's like an Apple Watch, and it tracks your heart rate, it tracks your sleep, and so forth. And that company announced a couple weeks ago that they had done a deal with the NFLPA, which basically licenses all the data for those athletes to the athletes, meaning that the individual athletes now own their biometric data, and they can do with it what they like, I believe. So if you think about that, and then you think about these gambling markets, I think it needs to become regulated by the NFL in terms of how this information can be sold, because obviously, if you're the third string punter on an NFL team, no one really cares. But if you're a quarterback, then you could probably sell your data for a lot, and that might be against the interests of your team, who's paying you your salary, and you're supposed to be competing to win for them. So it should get really interesting soon. And there's a lot of information out there. I think there was a Forbes article about 3 weeks ago about that deal, and I don't know if it connected these dots directly, but since we're having the conversation, it's interesting.
No, very, very interesting. We've got time for about one more question, so I will start with Mr. Brinkus over here, and I'll ask, the question is, what are your favorite examples of successful applications of sports analytics? Mr. Brinkus?
I think Moneyball, was very real. And I think it's going to become more and more real in terms of analyzing. You see how the running back position in the NFL is kind of disappearing, and people are analyzing. It's probably better to have fresh legs than older legs. I think that if you were to pick just one, I think baseball, in terms of their recruiting, has done a really good job. With that being said, I also think baseball is behind in terms of advancing the game. So they sort of run contrary to each other, but I think that that would be the one that I pick.
Stephen, you gave us a pretty good story already. And I feel you might be biased towards your own, but is there another one that you will reference?
Yeah, I think I can't name the name of the teams, but we had 3 specific teams in a league in Europe, and we performed a piece of research across all 3 of them, and they asked us to do it with the agreement that the data was anonymized for them, but they wanted a larger sample set. So we looked at the data across these 3 teams and how they were training and playing, and how that related back to wins and losses and points difference in games. And what we were actually able to do was come back to them and let them know, with different durations between games, so when they had 5 days between games versus 6 days versus 7 days versus 8 days, what's the optimal amount of workload they should put their athletes through in a given week to allow themselves the best opportunity for success. So we did it for these 3 particular teams, and we found out that each of them had a completely different makeup. And 2 of them were actually very similar, and one was completely different in that they actually needed to perform about 50% more training or more practice work throughout the week to actually get a win at the weekend. It was really interesting for us, because then we came back and looked at, well, what makes these guys so different? They play in the same league at the same level. Why are they so different? And when we did that, the characteristics we identified were that their team was far younger, and they had far more caps or appearances essentially for that specific team, and they had less than 100 international appearances. So they had a very inexperienced side versus the other sides actually had in the high hundreds. So what it actually told us was that these younger, less experienced athletes actually needed way more coaching to actually get themselves into a position where they're organized enough to win versus the other teams. So for us, once we actually fed this information back, they all changed the way they actually adapted and trained and performed. And that team subsequently won the domestic trophy the following year for the first time in their club's history. And I'm not suggesting that it's totally down to that. I'm not at all saying that. They had fantastic athletes and great coaches. But that changed fundamentally the way that they actually worked with their athletes day in, day out for the following season. And they had a completely different profile for them in terms of success. And for me, we took a huge amount of pride in terms of actually the fact that we helped them and enabled them to actually make better decisions.
Michael, what's your story?
Yeah, I'm biased as well. I think any entrepreneur who will come on the stage and tell you that another technology isn't the most exciting is doing themselves a disservice. So I think the platform we built is incredibly exciting. We have a bunch of the Valley Christian high school basketball kids in the stands tonight, and they're actually one of our customers who use the program. I didn't know that they would be here, but it's an interesting coincidence. We also have pro teams in the Bay Area. 4 out of the major 7 pro teams are using the system. And so I think when we're talking about this platform, I'm really excited about the technology we built because it's so applicable to both youth sports, elite sports, but then also as we look beyond to the healthcare industry, physical therapy is obvious, and then there's some of these other rehabilitation sciences that it also applies to. So we're really excited about what we're building.
Mr. Malloy, well, what's your success story that you appreciate?
That sounds like bragging. Plus, Stephen, I'm an investor in Stephen, so I'll leave it at that. I would, since I'm not a direct practitioner, I would say 2 things. For those of you that are for those of you that are just regular people, think about the future and don't allow the present to limit what you think is possible. Right? It is coming. It's coming really quickly. For those of you that are entrepreneurs, understand that you have to turn whatever it is you're working on to an advantage that is relevant to your customer, and you have to protect your relationship with the customer. Empower people that matter. Don't be afraid of change. Welcome data, because it's overwhelming us. Let's try to make sense of it. Don't be afraid of it, but be responsible. We're all stewards of the future. We're all working on it together. That's what I have to say.
And Howard Wright, what's the success story that you're looking at?
Ted, I think of it more as aspirational when the collective ecosystem works with some of the leagues, especially the NFL, to make CTE almost a thing of the past. I was lucky enough to have a father that played 13 years in the NFL, and he was all world, and he died 10 years ago, and I'm sure that he died of CTE. To think that we could help prevent catastrophic brain injuries from they're going to occur because it's 100% collision sport, but to have more preventative maintenance, to have better tests for the person, for the doctor on the sideline, as well as the doctor once they go in to get an MRI. Knowing that we're in this generation of use a little bit of this and use a little bit of his and use a little bit of his, that could help the NFL do that. I think that is part of changing the world and a moral responsibility that we have, in addition to creating this sexy sizzle reels that we'll create and enjoy and promote to the world.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, we have reached the end of this discussion, but if we could please give a round of applause to these 5 gentlemen.